Kings and other royals used the gold standard as a method for being able to facilitate trade with other countries and other people. The gold standard later became what was used in order to back currencies, so that currencies now had a value. The gold standard was enacted into law in 1900 by the Gold Standard Act of 1900. And basically what this said was that the U.S. currency would be backed by gold. And this system was used until World War I. And it represented a portion of gold was used for each piece of currency. At that particular time, the weight of this was based on 1/35 of an ounce of gold. And the redeemable value, according to the Gold Standard Act of 1900, was $20.67. Trade and other mechanisms were using the gold standard just fine. It did have its ups and downs, but later it would produce some tragic ends. And one of these tragic ends was the beginning of World War I. Since the gold standard relied solely on trade, now with the disruption of trade, you would have another problem. You wouldn't be able to get goods and services from one destination to the other. So now, when World War I broke out, now you had gold, but you wasn't able to do as much trading. But this facilitated, the war did facilitate it to some extent, though. But being able to facilitate it required you being able to print more money. That way you could be able to take care of yourself within the war itself, to be able to advance your military as well as have military upgrades. But the problem with having a gold standard was you had to have enough gold in order to back your currency. So now the countries that were abiding by the gold standard had a problem. They needed more money in order to advance themselves in the war, but they wasn't able to print it because it had to be backed by gold according to the gold standard. Another problem was also on the horizon. The Great Depression was also striking about this same time. So with the Great Depression, what people were trying to do, since the money had a gold weight, they wanted to be able to take their money, take it to the banks, get their gold, and then sell it on the open market to other countries that were buying the gold from them. This would lead to a reduction in the reserves in the United States. So something had to come about in order to halt this. Hence, the Gold Reserve Act of 1934. Under the Gold Reserve Act of 1934, President Roosevelt made all gold property of the U.S. Treasury. And it also made it so that the U.S. Treasury and other financial institutions, they were not allowed to exchange dollars for gold. So even though you had a currency that was backed by gold, according to what was in the gold reserve, you were not able to claim the actual gold for that currency any longer. Since so many monetary problems were attacking the gold standard that they had in place at the particular time, the Allied countries, 44 of them, in fact, along with the United States, they all came together in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. When they came together, they would sought to end the gold standard. And what the proposition was, instead of having the gold standard, they would rather use the United States dollar to back their currency instead of gold. And then the dollar would also maintain itself to be the viable currency that is backed by gold. And so since that they can compare their money to the dollar, then in essence, their money was also backed by gold because the dollar was backed by gold. So the Bretton Woods standard was then, passed into law, and that was the standard that we were on for a very long time until 1971, where it was ended by President Nixon. The dollar was chosen not only because it was backed by gold, but because also it was the currency that was a member of the country that had the largest amount of gold. So that was one of the biggest deciding factors in why the dollar also was used as the currency of the world. Along with these other changes, what we are now facing is the ability of countries to devalue their currency if necessary. And it was agreed as a consensus among all the nations that they were allowed to depreciate their currency up to 10%. In 1971, President Nixon has a brilliant idea because inflation was out of control and he was also faced with a recession at the same time. So he sought to devalue the currency to the gold that it was upholding at the time. At the time, it was still 1/35 of an ounce of gold, and it was changed to 1/38 of an ounce of gold, and later to 1/42 of an ounce of gold. And basically, by trying to devalue the currency, he was essentially trying to devalue the dollar at the same time. But it had a different effect. Since gold was also a traded commodity, by having less of it involved in the dollar, produced a surplus of it in the market. So the price of gold went up, which also forced the price of the dollar to increase as well because the dollar is being backed by gold. So eventually he suspends the dollar on the gold standard for a period of time, then eventually just did completely away with it because the system wasn't going to work in order to bring down inflation. Since President Nixon had ended the Bretton Woods Agreement, where the dollar was now being backed by gold, now the dollar will be based on the U.S. economy. What will be the pitfalls of doing this? Well, the thing now, instead of the dollar being backed by gold, it will be backed by the U.S. economy, and also will be subject to the thing called supply and demand. Other countries also start doing the same thing. And so what emerged from this is what you call a floating market. And so since currencies were free floating against each other, now the dollar is still the dominant currency. They agreed still to that piece. But now the free floating currencies allow the more dominant currencies like the pound sterling and the US dollar, it allowed those two to freely trade among themselves. And then you have the exchange rate between pesos and dollars. And so this allowed for a change in the system. Instead of it being more stagnant, now the system could be more volatile. And so under this system, which is the same system we use today, is the beginning part of Forex. This is what allows the currency pairs to be compared to each other and then allows them to also fluctuate. With the invention of the computers and with them starting to get more advanced and it's starting to show up in various forms across the nation, now the Forex market is more open to more aspects of trading. But you still had the Forex market being gated behind only individuals that had major bank accounts, like institutions, big, large corporations, and individuals that had at least $1 million or more inside of their bank account were the only ones that were allowed to actually trade Forex. So they was the only ones able to benefit from this fruitful market that had been generating itself as far as international trade. And they were able to enter as speculators, meaning that they didn't want to actually partake of the actual currency. Only thing they wanted to do was just observe a portion of the profits. With the invention of the internet, now combined with the computer usage, and now you had tons now of people being able to flourish into the market. And the reason is because you have various brokerages that were smaller and now they were offering leverage margin accounts in order for people to trade Forex. So you didn't have to have $1 million at this particular time to trade anymore. And that's the same standard that we actually use today. you can use a small amount of money and still partake of bigger moves because of using the actual small amount of money. So with the invention of the internet, the Forex market ended up turning into a $4 trillion a day trading mechanism. And so we utilize this trading mechanism. And even though it came from the very beginning, which is the gold standard, all the way down to present day, we still use this particular system today in order to be speculative traders in the Forex market. And so by being speculative traders, now that we have a history of Forex, now we can start digging down deep into Forex to get a better understanding. And let's start the beginning series of learning to trade Forex. Bye for now.